So we are recording now. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here, Jannah and Katya. It's an honor to host you, and I'm excited to learn from you. So over to you.
Yeah, thanks for having us. I'm Jannah. I am one of the co-founders of Pink Thawra, pronouns she, her. And a little bit just about myself. Let's say my more full-time gig is I have a human resources, people operations consulting business. And so Pink Thawra was kind of born initially out of the Tech for Palestine incubator to sort of help bring the conversation of pinkwashing to tech, because interestingly enough, pinkwashing was not a topic that was literally ever discussed within the Tech for Palestine ecosystem. And so, and then it kind of turned into, okay, folks wanted us to talk about this, helping to consult with both Tech for Palestine as an organization, but also with projects on not just pinkwashing, but pinkwashing in intersectionality, which we will talk about what that exactly means in a little bit. But that's Katya is my sister. I don't have my last name up here, but Katya is my older sister, and yeah, we're both Lebanese, proud Lebanese. We were raised in the U.S., but we don't claim that identity, nor was that really our experience. We had a very Lebanese and Muslim upbringing as kids. So that's a bit about me.
Yeah, and just really quick, I'm Katya, Jannah's sister. I also work in tech. I work as a product manager for an HR tech company. It wasn't planned that we both were working in HR. It's just the startup that I happened to start working at 6 years ago evolved into an HR tech platform. And so I got involved with Pink Thawra just by being an ally to my sister and also experiencing the sheer lack of true allyship from, the tech world and HR and the silence about Palestine, and then taking it deeper about the lack of representation even within within the pro-Palestinian community, about talking about the LGBTQ community and homophobia and transphobia and all of that. So yeah, together my sister and I worked on Pink Thawra for the last it hasn't even been a year yet, I think.
No, August of last year, I think.
Yeah, feels like a lot longer than that. But and then I also have my own project within the Tech for Palestine community. It's in its early days, but I'm just plugging it here because I always forget to do this. But it's called Lucy, and it's basically a hybrid of like Bandcamp and SoundCloud, where artists can sell their music, and it's people who self-identify as being anti-Zionist, anti-homophobic, anti-transphobic, and all of those things. So if anybody's interested in the music or has any, interest in connecting over this, that's another project that I work on the side.
I'm going to put it in here because you always forget to do it. You always forget to put your website.
This is the first I've remembered.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah. I do have a presentation, although I know this is like sometimes the space is like a little more informal, so we can kind of use this as a guide. It is lengthy, and it's because we use it to present to tech spaces like Tech for Palestine. And so if there are like spin-off rabbit holes, conversations that we want to go down as we go through this and people have questions, please let us know. But I can start sharing my screen and we can start to jump into it if that works.
Yeah, I think maybe one thing just to start with, and I don't know how we can indicate it, maybe through the chat, but like, does everybody in this room, and I know that we're recording this, so there may be people who don't, but does everybody in this room have some amount of familiarity with pinkwashing and with pinkwashing in general? Does anybody not have familiarity with that? Because I think that can also determine how deep we go into certain themes. Okay.
All right. Okay, all good. No worries. No worries at all.
Yeah. No, thank you. No worries. Thank you for being honest, Mohammed.
Yeah. Thank you for being honest. All good.
Yeah, and what we found in other presentations is that even people who had familiarity with it, there was a lot still new to learn within it. So We'll cover the most important parts, and we would love for it to be very conversational. If anybody has their own experiences or their own information that they'd like to share to elaborate on some of these topics, all are welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I'll also share, just because I've found that also sharing anecdotes of my own experiences with homophobia, but also experiences with real joy. For example, going back to Janoub in Lebanon in October, and experiencing a lot of love and welcoming, sort of like dismantling the idea of homophobia running rampant in every aspect of our society. So, and if any folks have anything they feel safe or comfortable sharing, like would love to chat. So yeah, I will start sharing my screen. Okay. Can everyone see?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
Awesome. Is it small? Why is it so small? Hold on. Oh gosh, what is happening?
It looks
It's okay.
Is that
big
super
to
small
us.
for people?
Yeah, no, it's full size for us.
Not like full screen, but I think it's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, it's
It's
full.
okay.
It looks full size for us, for the
Okay.
audience.
Okay. Let me know if there's any parts that folks can't see. It's very strange. I've never seen it do it like this in presentation mode before. Okay. We've already kind of covered who we are, but just in case, a little bit more about Pink Thawra. So we're Lebanese-led. We do have a member in leadership who is Palestinian, is based in occupied Palestine. We cannot include them in the vast majority, like they're not able to do public speaking. They kind of sit in the background, but I thought it was worth mentioning. They are queer, but out of risk of safety, not because they are queer, ironically enough, but because they are Palestinian living in occupied Palestine. They are unable to kind of be in the spotlight, but I want to mention that as well. But we are primarily here, like I said, to educate people on pinkwashing, but I think as we've evolved in Pink Thawra, we very quickly learned that a lot of the work that we also do is within our own communities, helping our own Arab communities decolonize our own minds, because the reality is even just the concept of queerness is seen as a Western import. And I'll touch on that a little bit later, but I think what we've come to find is not only are we doing education on pinkwashing for folks who don't identify in the SWANA community, but also within the SWANA community, within our own villages, even in the south of Lebanon. So yeah, and I also think another big thing that Pink Thawra has begun to do is trying to help be a part of redefining what queer and being a part of the SWANA community actually means, and not explicitly through the Western lens. So this can vary on different spaces. We do community events. We're going to be doing an event in Detroit in September. We've done events in Barcelona, online events, especially because it's more reach. And then we're also hopefully trying to put together some kind of a symposium for the Arab community, and also outside of the Arab community, but very much centering the Arab voices and Arab representation, as sort of a symposium that kind of combines music, culture, workshops, conversations. Hopefully, inshallah, that will work out in London at some point this year. So TBD on that, but we really kind of span the sort of spectrum there. So just quick vocabulary. LGBTQIA, some folks know the acronym, some people don't, so we always find it beneficial to put it on here. Pinkwashing is the propaganda strategy in which a state, the US and Israel being two very clear examples, corporations, institutions promote itself as friendly or inclusive or allies to the LGBTQIA community in order to distract from, mask, or legitimize other forms of oppression and violence, i.e. genocide, it is carrying out. Go for it, Katya.
Sure. So yeah, talking about intersectionality, this is a term that was coined in the 80s by a woman named Kimberly Crenshaw. And she was speaking about how Black women's experiences were not just because of their race, but it also had to do with sexism. So she experienced the world as a Black person, but also as a woman. And those compound into, the issues that both groups face compound together when you are a person that fits into both categories. So we're all intersectional in a lot of ways. So ironically and unfortunately, she has actually been quite quiet about Palestine. We haven't heard too much from her speaking up about Palestine, which is unfortunate. But intersectionality, again, it kind of looks at how various factors intersect, like racism, sexism, classism. So your socioeconomic status, how much money you have, homophobia, all of that. And it can create really harmful experiences. And if you view them separately, you will really miss out on the fact that a lot of these stem from the same place. So this is why talking about queerness at the same breath that you're talking about a free Palestine is so important, because the source of homophobia and transphobia is the same thing as the source of what is causing genocide, ethnic cleansing, apartheid, all of that in Palestine. So that's intersectionality. That's a word that we use a lot. And then homonationalism, it's coined by Jasbir Puar. And this is basically saying that movements that use LGBTQIA inclusion to build a national image of being modern and tolerant. So this actually is something that sounds really good, but then they turn that into a weapon and they use that to other people and reward the good gays that fit into their colonial standards. So it's, it's something that is commonly weaponized, especially that we see in Israel and the US and other colonial nations.
Just for, oh my gosh, this is going to be brutal probably with the small text. So I'll because I don't know. I think, I don't know. I literally don't know why the presentation is so small. But basically this timeline, I put this in here because a lot of folks don't understand, or not even necessarily understand, but don't know that a lot of these, like, it is illegal to be gay in Palestine. But all of these stem from the British mandates. And in Lebanon, it stems from the French mandates. So none of this is originally Palestinian, and none of them in Lebanon are originally Lebanese. So,
and I also just want to mention, just in case we don't get the chance to go super deep into it later, that this timeline also extends to various other colonized areas of the world, which includes Africa, the US. There's been a lot of really great content coming out for Pride Month about how colonialism brought homophobia and transphobia to the world through colonization. So this timeline is very much aligned with other areas of the world as well, and follows a very similar system.
Yes. And to be clear, again, it is not illegal in the West Bank today to be queer. Now, of course, we can talk separately about society and things like that, but I always want to paint that picture very clearly to people. In the Gaza, same thing, British mandate. Now, I will say that it is, while the British mandate is a lot of aspects, it's not even just queerness. It's been distorted to, again, do the whole, you're going to get thrown off a roof, go be gay in Gaza, etc., etc. And it's also been used to paint Gaza or to paint Palestinians as somehow uniquely homophobic, which we will talk about as well a little bit later on. But it's interesting how people are, the world and throughout time, tying into the sort of anti-Islamic sentiment that has just run rampant in our world, certainly in the 20th, 21st century. But it's a little wild to me that people don't understand that these mandates are not originally from Palestine, that they're not theirs. And so I wanted to paint that picture for Gaza as well. There are queer voices, LGBTQIA voices in Palestine, and listening to their experiences is extremely important. If you do not yet, I really, really recommend following this account. It's called What a Gaza Queer. And this is an account that is run from folks within Gaza. And they do a lot of collaborations, or not a lot, but they do some collaborations as well outside of Gaza. But they talk about this sort of experience of being dually exiled. Some from obviously in society, but also from their identities as Palestinians in Gaza, and also just, being genocided for the last 3 years. And so there's this fight of, okay, how do I exist both as a Palestinian and how do I also exist as a queer person and being Palestinian? Again, to that point of intersectionality, right? Like looking at someone's experience as a Palestinian and only a Palestinian can be relevant in a lot of contexts. And looking at someone's experience similarly as a queer Palestinian is also very relevant in different contexts. Oh gosh, this is actually a recent post that I pulled for today. I think this was from a couple of weeks ago. But again, I think this idea that queer people don't exist. I'm 34. I remember even being 28 years old and trying to find representation of queer Arabs in the world. And I struggled so hard. And especially as a teenager. And so even just seeing this on my journey as a queer Lebanese person, a queer Lebanese Muslim, has meant a lot to find community and to find people who are just like me. Because for the longest time, up until I met my first queer Arab when I was 30 years old, and I'm 34. And so I think listening to these voices, listening to the experiences are extremely, extremely important. And similarly, there's another account called Queers in Palestine that I would also highly recommend following. This is I pulled some screenshots from their account. And they've actually written some really great articles talking about, especially post October 7th, sort of asks for the non-Palestinian community, for folks who do support Palestine. So I would highly recommend looking into Queers in Palestine. And this was just more quotes from What a Gaza Queer. And I think this part is probably the part that is, I wouldn't say is the most interesting, but I think a lot of people are a little surprised at this part. Before we get into the examples, there are 4 basic pillars of pinkwashing. And this is from a queer Palestinian author named Said Akshan. He has a great book called Queer Palestine and the Gay International. Would highly recommend reading it. But the 4 basic pillars are: 1, highlighting LGBTQ rights in Israel while hiding and ignoring Israeli homophobia, which there's plenty in Israel, and the facade that homophobia doesn't exist in Israel is a complete farce. Number 2, highlighting Palestinian homophobia while erasing moments of queer Palestinian joy and positive experiences is another really common example. I find this also a lot in my experiences too. When I talk to people, especially growing up in the US, I struggled a lot to exist in queer spaces because people only ever wanted to hear about my experiences with homophobia. When they heard that I was Muslim, they're like, oh my gosh, that must have been so bad, so terrifying, etc., etc. But when it actually came to moments of joy and moments of positive experiences, people didn't want to hear that because it didn't fit into the narrative. And the same person who is Palestinian living in occupied Palestine, who is part of Pink Thawra in the background, has, after he came out, had nothing but positive experiences with his family. But people don't want to know that. People don't want to hear that because it doesn't fit into the narrative. Thirdly, comparing Israeli and Palestinian attitudes towards queerness to paint Israel as a civilized people and Palestinians as barbaric, especially when you look at the history of colonization. The colonizers came in and saw us all as barbaric, and it became this tug and pull of who's more civilized, who's more moral, so on and so forth. And then lastly, the one we all probably know most is branding Israel as the safe haven for the LGBTQIA community to attract tourism, investment, and political support. Let me touch on this super quickly, Katya.
Yeah. So Jannah mentioned this briefly, but one of the biggest things that we hear that you hear, go be gay in Gaza, they throw you off a roof, blah, blah, blah. And this narrative relies upon the vilification of Palestinians, Lebanese, Arabs, Muslims, that we are uniquely and more extremely homophobic. And that is rooted in racism, that's rooted in Islamophobia. And it really erases the reality that homophobia exists everywhere, especially in Israel, and it's running rampant in the United States. So it's like to try to convince somebody or try to make the claim that Palestinians and Arabs and Muslims are more homophobic than anybody else is strictly based in racism and Islamophobia. There's no other reason behind it. We are no more homophobic than any other culture in the world. And yeah, colonial powers have always portrayed the colonized people as backwards. And this is kind of something that I mentioned before, and this is a presentation in and of itself. But the pervasion of the heterosexual patriarchal society is critical for the survival of an occupier and for colonialization. So if they encounter, not just in the Arab world, but in any colonized society where queerness and people were fluid, there was no such thing as being labeled as a queer person, it was just part of life, they portray them as backwards or portray them as uncivilized to justify violence against them. They need to be civilized, so we're going to civilize them through violent measures.
I'm sure many of you have seen this photo. These were taken in Gaza. IOF soldiers basically saying that this was the first time that a pride flag has been risen in Gaza, and this quote right here was actually a quote from an Instagram message that I received from a former classmate of, well, they're still alive, but a classmate of mine from high school. And then I've also gotten this one too, but so is basically every other queer person who speaks out about Palestine.
I've even got that when people are talking to me about Jannah. They'll be like, tell your sister to go be gay in Gaza. I'm like, all right.
Yeah, exactly. So of course, like if this fits into the narrative of Tel Aviv being the only place you can be queer in the Middle East. And so, especially right now, Pride is actually happening in Tel Aviv right now as we speak. It goes, I think, from the 8th to the 12th. And so this was a huge part of their marketing campaign, is it's the only Pride in the Middle East. And they definitely use the Pride, this sort of liberal, modern sort of ideology to justify literally genociding people, standing over the bodies of Palestinians. Pride, like I said, happening right now. This is actually this was from this year. This was one of their, I'd say, first ads about Pride. Again, largest Pride festival in the Middle East. This one, I actually always like to tell a story. This is, people always get very confused by this, but confused in a way that they say it just doesn't make sense. So this billboard is from a billboard in San Francisco. And April, you'd say, hey, that's not Pride Month. That doesn't make sense. You're exactly right. So the story behind why Israel did this month-long, basically festival in Israel, culture festival, was in September. I think it was September or fall of 2009. So a few months before, there was an attack on a youth LGBTQ sort of like community facility in Tel Aviv by a settler, by an Israeli, by a Zionist. And the news caught wind of it, of course. And as a way to combat this narrative, they just spun out this Pride LGBTQ festival completely out of pocket months later to try to combat. Literally, this festival is happening in Israel, and they're advertising this on a bus billboard in San Francisco. Just comes to show that, and I feel like a lot of you all probably know this already, is like when something happens in Israel, typically there's propaganda, there's billions and millions of dollars that go out in media to try to combat whatever narrative is being spun out about them. There are so many queer Zionist influencers. It just makes me angry and makes my head spin. Oh yeah, Dal, go for it.
Sorry, ignore that.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, so there are a lot of queer influencers that will go around and say, oh, look, I can be gay. Like, you can't do this. And this influencer posted a video recently of being next to, literally in a room of IOF soldiers, saying, like, just, it was a weird sexualization of like these men and just like making it was very gross, very weird, just like this romanticization of being in the military. It was very strange. But this is probably one of the more cringe, I wouldn't say the most cringe, but one of them, they're all cringe. But this was an ad for Tel Aviv Pride for 2025, which ultimately didn't end up happening. Yes, they pushed very hard on sexualizing the IOF terrorist, for sure. And we'll see if this works. Hopefully it does. So I don't know if I really need to explain, but again, just this idea that they're the only ones that exist, who are liberal and can throw a pride parade. Yeah, it's cringe. Honestly, like, I had to go down a rabbit hole, unfortunately, of going on all these accounts to find them, and I felt so angry that I was giving them clicks in the process. But and I was just rage baited the entire time. I was just so angry. So I had to pace out my gathering of this information. Oh, next slide. There we go. Okay. And to Sedgman's point, this sort of like sexualization, the Maxime Gal Gadot magazine cover is a prime example of that. They did this to try to get more people to join the IOF. Gal Gadot served in the IOF, and so they were using this as a way to get people to join the IOF.
And it's also worth mentioning that there is an astronomical rate of sexual assault being reported within the IOF that women are reporting. So it's just like, it's even they're pinkwashing their own crimes within their own organization against each other. I mean, I don't think that should come as a surprise to anyone, but they sexualize the IOF, but then they also sexually abuse the women in the IOF.
Yeah. Yeah. Brand Israel was started, quote unquote, officially in 2005. I'd say it started more unofficially probably in 2002, 2003. But it started officially in 2005 in a joint project with Israel's Foreign Ministry and Tourism Ministry. And this was especially let's say, gained momentum after the Second Intifada, because they did this to basically change the perception of Israel. And we're talking, and we'll get into the numbers, but we're talking millions and millions and millions of dollars that are poured into this. And we're talking like Neil Patrick Harris, they had come to a Tel Aviv Pride. Lady Gaga, you're talking big, big names that are drawn in money that is spent to fly influencers out on a literally rainbow painted Israel branded airplane. And I kid you not, they literally painted an Israeli, like Israeli colors and pride airplane. I forgot to add that photo, but it does exist. So here are some of the numbers. And of course, as it goes with, yeah, agreed, Salman. And to be clear, like a lot of these numbers that I gathered are from news outlets. As we know, Israel is not transparent about basically everything that happens. And so these numbers could be different. They could, I'm imagining, are likely higher than we're seeing right here. So I just want to add that context. So the investment obviously started before, but where I could find the data and the information started in 2007, starting with about 40 million. And then there was an extra $16 million added bonus to help with the war after the 2006 war with Lebanon. So then we go to the tourism ministry, launching a $90 million campaign to position Israel as close to the US and Europe's sort of like pride image as they possibly could, as well as painting them as the #1 tourist destination in the region. Again, the ministry budget in 2011, and then I don't know why the number dipped in 2016, but then we just go only up from there. And it was reported that for 2025 and 2026, yeah, agreed. In 2025, 2026, and this is not just for Pride and getting gay tourism to Tel Aviv, but their overall hasbara spend is $729 million. That is an insane amount of money to protect your image. So of course, no surprise. Why would you spend so much money if you're doing all the things, if you're as pure as you say you are? Go for it, Simon.
Yeah, so like that $729 million number, that's been widely reported over the last year. Like we have seen that, and we are seeing results of that, right? Like they've bought crazy number of ads on Google, for example, and we're seeing the results of that. So when you search Palestinian figures and voices that are speaking up against Palestine, and then Israeli results show up on top as sponsored, right? And the Dr. Abu Sida and other doctors and other personalities like Francesca Albanese, Retta, other, and um, how much do you think like they're specifically focusing on pinkwashing out of that larger budget?
Yeah, of course, like I looked as hard as I could to find if there was any like specific number towards pinkwashing. But I would say there's like, I mean, think about it. Pride in 2019 brought in $43 million to Tel Aviv alone. And so if we're talking about ROI for them, not only is it helpful for perception, it is also helpful financially for them. Right. And so I think if we're talking about Tel Aviv Pride that's happening right now, I will be very curious to know if there are any numbers that come out of that. And mind you, it's like with the propaganda spends, I am seeing, unfortunately, when I was doing a lot of my research, you see a lot of influencers. They do a lot of this through influencers. And they do a lot of this through also saying, hey, if you come to Tel Aviv Pride, then you can come experience true liberation, true freedom. And not only that, they use celebrity. Celebrity is and this is not a secret for how Israel uses propaganda, but I would imagine if I was to just do pure numbers on the ROI of the hasbara spend from what they made in 2019, I would have to imagine at least a fourth, if not more, is being allocated towards this.
And another burning question that I have is like, how did things change, if at all, in 2024, 2025, and this year, since after the genocide? Because we know Israel's perception has changed significantly all over the world. First time in America, more negative than positive, in shifting over the last several months, and similar trends in all other parts of the world. Do we have any research or numbers into how that's affecting the pride activities and other related activities in the last 2 or 3 years?
Are we talking in Israel itself?
Yeah. So like, maybe 2022, they're bringing in celebrities like Neil Patrick Harrison, but now they, I imagine people like him and others, most others are just like, okay, nah, I'm not touching that. I'm not going anywhere near that, right? Some celebrities still don't care, but many, even if they're not, like they just want to, like at best maybe avoid drama or whatever. And so like, has anything shifted basically since the genocide started? So that's the short version of the question.
Go for it.
Yeah, I think things definitely have shifted. I think what is strategically not super documented is that decline. Like, it's worth noting that a lot of the data that we try to find tapers off around 2023, 2024. And I think that also coincides with, with the start of, with the escalation of the genocide. So as Jannah mentioned, that number that we see for 2025, they're not really, we aren't able to tell if there's a lack of investment financially. But I would say, non-scientifically speaking, there definitely has been a decline. Like, I think just anecdotally, people that I know specifically, you can also see on social media, like a lot of people have been awoken to this. However, they still have their goonies and they still have their financial campaigns to get people to like even attempt to spit out the propaganda about pride. Right. But for example, Jannah, is that Dead Sea Festival? Did that end up happening or no?
The one that was supposed to happen for Pride, for this Pride?
Yeah, there was, well, like there's Pride, but then there's like the festival that they were.
Yeah. It from what I can tell, it happened, but of course, it's like you never know until after the fact.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's and I agree. And someone put in the chat, Dal put in the chat, targeting religious groups presumably is more effective than society in general. I agree. I think that there are still organizations who hang their hat only on, and of course it depends on what everyone's interests, what interest people are operating in, right? But I agree with that. And I also think that I feel like people really hang their hat on their support for Israel because of this. And I think that happens a lot. I've seen it in the queer community, is that they rely so much on the fact that there's this facade of progressive society and that there's a pride in the Middle East, that is what maintains their attachment. And for some, that's what completely removes their attachment. I've seen a lot of queer people open their eyes to, or at least wake themselves up to the harmful ways Israel perpetuates its occupation and maintains its occupation. So I think, in summary, Salman, I think there has been definitely a shift, especially like 2025. The Pride technically didn't happen, but that's because there were bombs flying in every which way. So I think it also just couldn't happen. But the fact that they decided to continue with 2026 just again reminds us all that they really do think a lot of themselves.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah. No, good questions. One thing that I've actually gotten, one thing that we've both gotten in certain spaces and more explicitly pro-Palestinian spaces is, why are we talking about queer Palestinians? Why are we talking about pinkwashing? A lot of people will say we can't talk about queer rights until we have a free Palestine. And let's say in those experiences, when we get that sort of pushback, a lot of the times it's a way for people to hide behind their homophobic beliefs. But it is something that people have said to us, is, why are we talking about this? We can't talk about this until we have a free Palestine. And my response to them is it not our responsibility to understand the ways in which Israel is able to perpetuate its occupation? And typically their answer is yes. And so I say, okay, is pinkwashing not a part of that equation? And they say, yeah. And I say, okay, so why shouldn't we be talking about it? And then if I were to just remove that sort of pragmatic way of thinking, it's just the right thing to do. And so I say this a lot, and I don't say this a lot, but I say this sometimes about my own out of community in some spaces, is like, sometimes we're hypocrites, right? Like, and like we're oppressing another people while talking about the oppression of another. And so it's all connected, and Katya talked about this at the beginning, but it's all a part of the same system. And if any of you haven't heard of it, I would highly, and I've done videos kind of summarizing some of my takeaways from this, but if you haven't read it, please read this book. It's called Designer Arabs. It is about the history of how colonization impacted the way people see queerness, and the history of art and poetry that's been systematically buried. And it is dense, but I have gone down so many rabbit holes, and I've learned so much about my own history, because I'll be honest with you, I had no idea, because that's the way it was meant to be. We were meant to think that queerness didn't exist ever in our societies, but it did, and it's documented. And so, but people don't want to talk about that because, again, it goes against the narrative. So I would really encourage you all to read that book.
Yeah, and for the sake of time, you can go to the next slide. For the sake of time, there are 3 schools of thought that I'll super quickly breeze through. Some people are of the belief that there's no hierarchy for liberation, so there is no, liberate Palestine from the Zionists first and then worry about queer Palestinians. There's another school of thought that is just that, free Palestine first, and then let's focus on queer liberation. And then there's the third school of thought that's the global queer solidarity and the anti-pinkwashing approach. And this is more about building international queer and trans solidarity. And this involves the BDS movement, protests, and just openly critiquing and calling out and identifying pinkwashing. And so the short of it is there is no right answer. I think they all have merit, and it depends on who you are and what situation that you're in. But the most important thing to keep in mind through all of these schools of thought is that they are both related. They're both coming from the same place. So if you're fighting one, you're automatically fighting. If you're fighting for one, you're automatically fighting for the other, and vice versa. We can go to the next slide. Just really quick here, there are Palestinian LGBTQIA plus organizations in Palestine. One is called Aswat, one is called Al-Qaws, and they are operating within Palestine and occupied territories to fight for their own liberation along with the Palestinian Liberation. They're amazing groups that you should check out online. But yeah, and there, you can take a freeze frame of this if you watch this recording back.
Yeah, and I think obviously queers in Palestine we mentioned as well. But I think and I'm happy to share this presentation, Salman, if it's helpful, because there are examples of allyship amongst Palestinians, 2019 being one of them. And I think it is, yeah, I know for this, I just want to be conscious of time. But I think one thing that I want to emphasize to people, and I'll stop sharing my screen. But one thing that I want to emphasize to people is, and this has been my experience, and I know it's been experiences of other queer Arabs, Lebanese and Palestinians more specifically, is that we're battling many forms of propaganda. In Palestine, in Lebanon, it is thought that queerness is a Western import, which I mentioned earlier. People think that, and this is done by propaganda, right? People's reference of queerness is fractured, it's warped. And it is seen as this sort of, we're messing up the family structure, we're trying to Westernize. That's sort of the key thing.
Against Islam.
Against Islam, which that's a different conversation. Of whether it's in the Quran or not is a hot debate. And so I think one thing to remember is that when I'm talking to people, even in our village in Junub in Lebanon, I am battling not only the propaganda from the Zionist state generally, the Zionist entity generally, I am also battling the propaganda that that same entity has put into their minds about me. And so we're trying to deconstruct two different layers of colonization, helping people understand that my being queer and queerness is not a Zionist or Western import, that it exists and it has existed for a long time. Because I think when people think of resistance against Israel, they think about resistance against queerness, because queerness and the Zionist entity have been put together. So I think when you think about, and I always have that in mind when I talk to people in our own Arab community. It's like I don't get angry. I'd say my patience level is a bit higher because I understand that level of colonization of their minds, of our minds, and that I am also learning in the same way about our own history because it has been systematically buried or systematically warped. So yeah, go for it, Severin.
Yeah. and the same colonization effect, is global. In the Arab community, in my own Pakistani Indian community. I'll give you a real example. When I shared, these weekly meetings, I shared them in a large number of groups, and one of them was like a University of Toronto Muslim alumni group, and I shared it there, and then one person was like, "Why is this being shared in a Muslim group?" Right? And it so that and I know that person is most likely Pakistani, who said that, and and we need to counter the colonialist Zionist effects, as well as what happens within our own community as well. And what and this may be too big of a question, but like what do you think should be like the first step or first couple of steps to counter these kinds of comments? And I'll be honest, like I should have responded, but I just kind of like I didn't end up responding, and I'm kind of ashamed of that. So yeah, please.
It's a hard battle to respond. Like, we had this happen in the Tech for Palestine Discord. We posted about Pink Thawra, and someone was like, "How dare you mention, the LGBTQ? Like, keep that out of the Palestinian discussion." Like,
I said Alhamdulillah, and they said, "How dare you say Alhamdulillah in the same text, in the same sentences, talking about queerness."
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
But I would say, like, one of the first. I mean, it's a really hard barrier to break to even get them to like be willing to speak to you. I think one of the discussions, like speaking from our dad's experience, because he has had to deconstruct a few people in our village, but they lead with Islam, and they're, our dad knows the Quran pretty well, super well. And so he leads with Islam, and they're like, he's like, "Tell me, where does it say that?" And then, that gets into that sort of discussion. And then he kind of leads into the, is it your position to judge, or is it didn't God made everybody in his image? Didn't God make everybody the way that they're supposed to be? That everybody is perfect and made in God's image? And aren't you supposed to love everybody unconditionally? And that's kind of, and Jannah, feel free to correct me on any of the details of this or add to this, but it's been kind of this like disarming of people when they realize that they're dehumanizing somebody. And then for me personally, if I get into these discussions, I'm straight up say, when I'm speaking, that if you're homophobic, you're no better than a Zionist. And it's true, because homophobia relies on the dehumanization of a person. And the way that the Palestinians are being genocided and cleansed is because they're not viewed as human. So that also catches people off guard. But a lot of people are super combative and defensive, and they think like, no, I can't possibly be that. So it really kind of depends on the angle of the person that you're speaking with and their, what their defense of their homophobia is. So it's not a straight answer, and it kind of also depends on your ability to speak to the different themes, like your ability to speak to the Quran, your ability to speak to, God's creations and religion and stuff like that. And then your ability to also speak to dehumanization and, square up with people for that. But
yeah.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And, just a tiny bit of silver lining. Several people chimed in afterwards in that particular community group, not necessarily defending, but pointing out that we need to gain knowledge and be, know about these topics and how Israel uses and abuses a whole bunch of different communities, including the queer community, for its gains. So we have questions from Mohammed and then Dal. Mohammed, please. Mohammed's joining us from Gaza, by the way. Thank you for joining, Mohammed.
Ahlan wa sahlan.
Thank you so much, Salman. I don't know from where should I start, but two things that got my attention during this meeting when, I don't know, Katya or Jannah shared that if you will go to Gaza, they will throw you from a roof. And when Salman said that someone in the Muslim community said what he said to him, I want to mention that, Alhamdulillah, the war has lots of disadvantages, but it also has a little bit of advantages. Nowadays, Alhamdulillah, people after the war has become more aware, because they have been seeing what communities are supporting us, whose people supporting us. And as Salman said, the Muslim community, unfortunately, the Muslim community let us down. Literally, the Muslim community let us down. Alhamdulillah, and there is a hadith for Prophet Muhammad that there is a time when the people with a different religion, they will support us, and the people with our religion, they will not support us and will let us down. So Alhamdulillah for everything, and this is my thoughts. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I got chills. Thank you for sharing. No, and before we get, I think Dal, you had a question, but I think one thing in response to both you, Muhammad and Salman. One, to answer you, Salman, I always try to bring people to, or at least try to assess people's capacity for curiosity. I think curiosity is, in my experience, the most powerful way into a conversation. Because if someone doesn't have the curiosity, it is going to be a brick wall, no matter how hard you push. And I only know this from experiencing my own homophobia, my own conversations where my sister and I went 4 years going back and forth of not speaking to our parents because the homophobia had affected me to a point where my mental health got to a really, really scary place. But now, alhamdulillah, both of my parents, now my dad is talking to people in our village in Junub and Lebanon about my queerness, and like now he's like he's like my ally Baba forever and ever. And both of them are, both my parents. And so I think, but that didn't come without pushing the curiosity. And with them, it was somewhat forced curiosity. But I would say for someone who's not your family, or someone who you may not want to, or who you may want to or not want to try to gauge that curiosity or push that curiosity, I typically try to ask questions as a response. So if someone says, "How dare you talk about this in, a Muslim space?" I ask them why. And then they answer you, and I say, and I dig a bit deeper by questions, and eventually they end up cornering themselves. That's been my experience, is they end up cornering themselves, or if they get to that point where you just ask them questions, they kind of like explode emotions, and then it's khalas, like there's no point in going down this road. And then to you, Muhammad, I have heard that hadith before, and it has caused at least friction in the spaces where it's been shared. But I agree, and I also think it is. I also think there's a feeling sometimes, at least from me, that I know that once, like, I love that folks in Gaza are seeing the people who have shown up in the queer community. I know there's been so many queer communities and so many queer spaces that are fighting so hard for a free Palestine. And so I love that that's been something that you all have seen, because I do think that there is a semblance, at least in the propaganda that I've heard from cousins, my own cousins, that we don't care about the culture, we don't care about the religion, we just want to disrupt everything, we just want to throw everything away. But no, we want to integrate, we want to hear about your experiences, we want to learn, etc., etc. So I love that that's been some people's experience in Gaza. That's great.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Yes,
Hey, Jannah, did we meet at Barcelona at T4P at the bar at the entrance?
We did. Yes, I recognize your face now. Yes, 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 yes. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm gonna say something. Yeah, bro, don't get mad, okay? Don't
Okay.
get mad. But it's before I was homophobic, but then I saw like a crazy gay guy, like with pink hair and all my homophobic habits. Okay, sorry, because they were in. I live in Paris, and they were like in the neighborhood in Marais, like they wherever I pass, like I have hands in my ass, but no worries. So, and I saw the guy fighting with the police for Palestine. I was like, the nigga got balls. And then there's all motherfuckers like I went to the mosque and stuff, and the guy with the like the hair like the thing here because he prays a lot.
Hmm.
He's like, yeah, fuck Iran. Iran are kafirs. We should not stand with Iran. I was like, and the guy was like always like against gays, against whatever is not he is. I was like, and there is a problem. We cannot. I mean, I was shocked. I said, Muhammad, that the people you was not expecting were with you, and the people that you were expecting to be on board, they were against you. And it was like, it reminded me of the story of the Jews that started praying the golden calf, like let's say 50 days after they saw the sea split in two. And I was like always smoking weed and thinking about that thing because it makes me very philosophical to think about how could you see the water split on two and then you pray a golden calf. You're such an ungrateful motherfucker. Yani, it's weird. So that's it. And now I'm no more homophobic, and we need to take the system down. And that's it.
That's such a great the origin story. Like you saw a queer person fighting in the street for Palestine, and like that's what we mean by intersectionality. They're not just fighting for Palestine; they're fighting for themselves.
Yeah.
Yes, I want to add something to Muhammad. If we look at it this right now, see it, Muslims in Arab Muslims countries, they're not doing, and they are so afraid. I'm talking to them every day. They are so afraid to support anyone because their government and things like that. And a gay or not a street man, I'm not coming with these terms, they are supporting us in the Western countries. Could you imagine that? A little bit think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, 100%. It's it's funny in the book Desiring Arabs, they call them petrol Arabs, and that that they wanted so badly to be like the West that they adopted the exact thing that
Yes.
they were claiming to fight against. And now they're just unapologetic, and it's we know this now. It's not a facade. It's not a mask. But yeah, and I think there was another question, but someone had their hand raised. I just want to make sure.
Dal, do you still have your question, or are you done? You're good.
I'm good.
Okay. Tom,
Okay.
do you have a question now?
No, I do not.
Okay. All right. All good.
Sorry,
All
I was
good.
late. Once a month, we have a community call at T4P that coincides with this meeting, so I was late for that reason, which sucks. But I'm looking forward to the recording because I want to hear what Katya said in the beginning.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you. I
Yeah.
appreciate you. All right. So since there's no more questions, maybe we'll come to an end. Katya and Jannah, like my heart feels full in a very positive way, and so thank you so much for being here. I appreciate both of you sharing. I was particularly happy to learn about so many positive stories. eh, this um, with your community, with the queer community. In this context, there can sometimes be like too many negative stories to share. And I'm really happy that you had some positive stories to share. And there was some unlearning for me personally too. Like, you know, I do see like the Muslim community in general as very homophobic, but maybe, you know, it's not as homophobic as I perceive it to be. And like, you know, it's good to hear that from your perspective as well. And, you know, it doesn't mean we ignore the problems, not acknowledge the problems, not address the problems, but still also celebrate the good as well. So that was definitely some good unlearning for me. Would you like to say any last words before we end the call?
I just want to say thank you. It's always like if you would have told me even 4 years ago that I'd be sitting here talking about my Lebanese-ness and my queerness in the same breath, I would have told you that you are living on Mars. So honestly, it's such a privilege to be able to be talking about this, and you know, I'm just so thankful when we're able to have the space for this. And whether it's one person or 1,000 people listening, it is so incredibly important because in my experience, talking to one person can change 1,000 people. And so I'm just so thankful to everyone who was here and engaged or just sat to listen. And thank you so much, Salman, for having us. Honestly, I'm truly, truly a privilege. So thank you.
Yeah, and the one last thing that I'll say as, you know, the ally side of Pink Thawra is that being an ally or a non-queer trans person is like such an important role to play, because just like it's not Palestinians' responsibilities to fight to end, I mean, they're fighting because it's their land, but it's our responsibility around the world to fight for them. Same thing for queer people. It's our responsibility as allies, because it's oftentimes heterosexual people that are causing this damage. So it's our responsibility as well as non-queer people to carry this burden for them or to share the burden with them while centering their experiences and centering their voices. But the allies in this fight are extremely important, just like the non-Palestinians are in the fight for a free Palestine.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you again, Jannah and Katya. Thank you everyone else who joined. I appreciate all of you always, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. If you have any speakers in mind, 2 weeks from now, we had a cancellation. Normally we're booked months in advance. We're booked until pretty much September, but we had a cancellation for 2 weeks from now. So if you have a speaker in mind, please send your suggestions. And that's it for now. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Everyone, take care.
Bye.
Bye.